Alrighty, it is 2 minutes after the hour of 8 o'clock on this, the 7th day of October. And let's welcome Dennise Demming. Good morning to you.
Good morning, and thank you ever so much for me being here. I'm Dennise Demming, the host of Power Conversation on a Monday and a Wednesday from 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. We dig deeply into issues that are trending in our country. Some of them are exciting, some of them are absolutely boring. Today's guest is Rudolph Hanamji, and I suspect that today's discussion will be absolutely exciting. Welcome, Rudolph, and let's begin by you telling us something about share your background with us.
Thank you, Denise. Good morning to you and the hosts, and of course, our audience listening on. Thank you so much for having me. A little bit about my background. Well, 25 plus years in the marketing and business development and public policy fields. I actually began my career in human rights advocacy when I was 15 years old as a student of Queen's Royal College. I like to think of myself as the product of grandparents and a family who were invested in education. I lost my father when I was 14 years old. That gave me a certain perspective on life. I've been the youngest member of the National Executive of the Congress of the People, which I resigned from in 2013. I then have also served as an advisor to Hope, which I also resigned from in January this year. And I founded one of Trinidad and Tobago's largest NGOs, PARTT, and I think my background has really been in helping other people by leveraging my privilege. So I'm really happy to be here, as I said, and to share some more insights with you.
Thank you. And you talked about QRC, and that's where you began your life as an activist. Is that
It was.
typical of QRC to produce activists throughout our country?
Well, you know, Denise, most of us have drunk the blue Kool-Aid. So my initial answer would have to be yes. Uh, but in reality, not enough of us. There are of notable QRC graduates who've gone on to lead the country and to really fashion our society, especially in the post-independence era. In more recent times, a few of us have gone on to be advocates for the arts and cultural sector, in politics, in business, finance. But I would like to see more of my brethren really take up that mantle and do more with the privilege that the Queen's Royal College brand invested in them.
Hmm. What do you mean by drunk the blue Kool-Aid? What's that?
So, well, just to give your audience some context, in January I turned 40. So, when I joined the college in 1995, the idea of the prestige school system was even more uh, hardcore than I think it is today. Starting to see that uh, entire perspective be shaken a bit with other schools sort of finding their place in the ecosystem. But from the moment you passed, back then it was common entrance, and you found yourself in one of these prestige institutions, you would immediately be socialized to understand that you were different from the rest of society. As a matter of fact, I remember back then, even the Ministry of Education would talk about the top 8% of the country. So, on with that as a general national sentiment, you could as well imagine an additional layer having gone to the college where the first prime minister, opposition leader, Nobel laureates, etc., had gone themselves. You were sitting in the very classrooms that these people had been educated in. So the teaching administration, your family, they reinforced these notions that you had been given a great responsibility. And by wearing that shirt jack, that blue shirt jack, you had to make some kind of positive contribution to society. So that's what I'm talking about. As I said, it didn't work on everyone, but some of us, we're still drinking it today.
And that is so good because, I mean, I QRC sometimes I don't like, but generally I really respect what QRC has produced. And you talk about doing common entrance. I wrote common entrance as well. And there's such a big difference, a big gap in our ages. But really is something that I need to do. I need to remind our viewers, our listeners, please reach out to us on the chat or call us on 222 Talk. That's 222-8255. And if you're in the US or in Canada, it's toll free 866-525-1099. That's 866-525-1099. Or you can WhatsApp us on 868-318-1021. 868-318-1021. So, Rudy, you just gave us something about your background. There's a question that I like to ask people whenever I'm doing this interview. And that question is, what do you do when you are not working?
Is there a time when I'm not working? I, I I've been asked that on a number of occasions in different ways. I like to think that I build, I dream, I organize. As you said, I advocate. As a matter of fact, in the last few months, most of my free time outside of my substantive role is invested now in building a new movement. It's called the Portal for Accountability and Representation for Trinidad and Tobago, and it's focusing on 6 key projects, but altogether really about educating, empowering, and engaging the citizenry so that they could be more active in participatory democracy. So that's really what I spend my time outside of the office working on, and it's bearing some fruit. It's building upon my decades of other work and experience and working with a great team. So that's what I do.
So that's what you do. You just gave me a whole long name for this organization, Portal of whatever, whatever, whatever.
Our part. It's easier that way.
So for people to remember it, they need to remember our part.
Yes, because the tagline is if I do my part and you do your part, then together we do our part. So yeah,
Okay.
just Google us or look for us on Instagram. It's easy to find. Our part, TT.
Okay. And having been successful with beginning Pride and having it become a really substantial movement, what did you learn from that that you could possibly apply to building our part?
I learned that unlike these stereotypes that some of us reinforce, for example, Trinidadians are apathetic, lazy, late people, etc. I learned, Denise, firsthand that most of us actually want to build a better Trinidad and Tobago. I have found that most of us coalesce amongst common value systems. People don't always see the world in the exact way that others do, but they can agree for most parts what is right and what is wrong. And I've even seen my fellow citizens who may not necessarily ascribe or reinforce a certain value system actually stand as allies and champions for those who do ascribe to that view of life, because they understand that people have to exist in the society, they have to coexist in the society. And that is really what we are leveraging, that commonality, that patriotism that is inside of all of us, at least 99.9% of us. And sometimes it's just dormant, or it's repressed or oppressed because of surviving daily life, but it's there. So that's what I learned, and I learned how to leverage it and weaken it.
Well, that is very interesting learning that you experience because what you are triggering in my mind is that generally I see people who want to leave. I see people who talk about how disgusting this place is, how much they don't like what is happening. So I'm surprised that you your learning is that the majority of us want to transform and want to change and want to improve Trinidad and Tobago. Could you tell me a little more about that thinking?
So you're right. I mean, most of my schoolmates, unfortunately, from Queen's Royal College, have migrated over the years, and that is part of what adds to the brain drain. I think some reports have it as almost 70%. In more recent times, with crime levels being where they're at and the lack of business support ecosystems and a number of other factors, there is anecdotal and other data out there to suggest that businesses are closing, people are migrating. Uh, the interesting thing is that, fortunately or unfortunately, most of us can't. So it forces us in a way to find that true avenue to fulfilling our potential while we're here. And, and interestingly, people sometimes forget that some of the greatest world changing things came out of Trinidad and Tobago. I mean, the steel pan, which is actually the inspiration behind one of our projects, the Spree think tank. The steel pan, to my mind, Denise, I know you're a lover of the pan as well, is perhaps the best symbol of innovation in the world. Someone Winston and others saw this rotting, rusty oil drum in the mud and envisioned the most beautiful instrument. Rojanath Kapildeo gave NASA the Kapildeo theorem, which helped NASA reach the moon. So inside of everyone, from young children to adults to senior citizens, you still see that spark of creativity, that innovation. People get up on a daily basis, they go to work, they try to make a difference. And when there are opportunities for public consultations, genuine public consultations, or there are discussions out there, I am always encouraged by the number of positive feedback and feedback points and ideas that our people have shared. So that's what I'm really looking at. People don't get involved in the same way. Not everyone has an hour to spend in a meeting or cares to march in the street with a picket sign, but
Mm.
they can do their part, pun intended, in their own way to foster better Trinidad and Tobago.
Mhm. I am one of those who absolutely believes that we have a beautiful country. We have a country with tremendous resources, both human resources and other resources, so that we have the potential. But the leadership is where our challenge is. And my observation is that people, before they become leaders, they're generally people who are very acceptable, very thinking. And as soon as they become leaders, they transform into horrible, evil people. Anyway, that's my thinking. But we came here this morning to have a conversation about something that you said about how does reality affect politicians? Is that what is the statement you had made about that? I think you were quoting our former Prime Minister, Basil Pandey. What was the comment?
Everyone, it always amazes me that even young children that I meet, and I say young relative to us, right? 20-year-olds, first time workers, they all know this saying: politics has a morality of its own. And it was coined. I think he borrowed some of the sentiment, as you could imagine, from other philosophers over the years, but he coined it in his own unique way. And interestingly, it has had a profound impact on my career and my life, because my business ethics lecturer, Surendra Arjun, he chose that as the debate question for my final coursework, I should say, exercise. And different students found themselves on either side of the argument. And I was on the opposing view. And I ended the statement because of the research that our group had done. And when we had unpacked that position, we came to the conclusion that indeed it was not politics, but indeed politicians who choose to have a morality of their own. And Mr. Arjun was so taken with that position that he told me once he still refers to it in his class. And because of that experience and that research, uh, it left me with a certain perspective where I push back when I hear people use that statement today to sort of justify and explain away, as you said, why some leaders, most of them unfortunately in the political landscape, uh, seem to transform into a monster or a disconnected
Yeah.
leader from the citizenry.
Thank you for stating the name Surendra Arjun, because when I did an MBA, he taught me, and we became very close because I was doing so badly in his subject area. So we became very close, and he was an excellent person, a person who has a real empathy to others.
Yes,
So
yes.
what you're saying is that our former Prime Minister Basio Pandey said that politics has a reality of its own, but your conclusion is not politics, but it is politicians. Is that
Yes,
what
that have
I'm
a
hearing?
morality. Yeah, they choose their own morality to justify what they want to do. Yeah.
Okay, so if it's the politicians that have a morality of their own, then we ought to be selecting politicians in a very different way. What do you think?
Well, you know that saying, I want to believe it was Marx, but I may be wrong. The idea of people get the government that they deserve. It's a sort of a distillation of statistics, really. It's about numbers. So if you break it down, the political system that we have maintained from our colonial masters is one where you have a certain number of people in the society who actively belong to political parties. And that small, relatively small number of people in Trinidad and Tobago, they actually choose who are the main leaders of those organizations. And then the rest of us are forced to choose from amongst those. So our fellow citizens who are active in politics, they give us the first filter. And what is happening, what is really happening is that people practice this concept of situational ethics. Again, Dr. Arjun carried us through that in our formative years. There's really no such thing as situational ethics because ethics as a principle is fixed. However, people bob and weave, they twist principles, they close their eyes at times or their noses for that matter, and let things pass. And unfortunately, what we're seeing in the politics is that, and Senator Suniti Miraj made this point a few weeks ago at an event she was speaking at that the Bokas Lit Fest held. She made the point that the members of political parties really, for and I'm my words, they practice this type of situational ethics and they facilitate, enable, and reinforce what the leaders say and how they act rather than holding them to account and ensuring that the best characteristics come to the fore. So the rest of us, and I'm speaking generally, of course, we choose then to equally, in a way, accept what is presented to us. And we say, well, all right, these members have voted for these particular leaders. Which of the, and you hear it in society, Denise, which is the lesser of the two evils, to use your word. So this, what starts happening is that the population tacitly and in some ways overtly gets involved in reinforcing this situational ethics approach, this unique morality that is seen in the politics. But politics by itself is a system, and systems, like any other created uh, approach or methodology, those systems have to be enacted by people. And like any other organization, I mean, you've been a leader in other organizations, whether you led a department or the entire organization, you sort of set your North Star and say, this is our culture, this is what is acceptable, what is right, what is wrong. And people have to ascribe to that or get out. That doesn't happen in the politics, unfortunately. So it's easy for politicians to sort of, and not just politicians, but people who have a vested interest, to use this saying to equivocate and cop out and say, well, that's how it is. And unfortunately, that has created a vicious cycle, because good people who are right thinking and ethical, they tend to stay away, or believe that they shouldn't become politicians, because almost immediately you are associated with that brand, that unethical brand. And that's what's happening in the society.
There's something I would like you to just explain, because I often focus on the person in the maxi listening to us. When
Oh,
you talk
yes.
about situational ethics, tell me, what
Yes.
do you mean by that?
My grandmother, when I was very young, she gave me this story of an old lady, another grandmother, who was seeing about her grandson, because he was orphaned. His parents had been lost, and she took him in. And over the years, he would start to bring things home to sort of as gifts. He would bring uh, parcels of groceries, or he would bring pieces of jewelry. And she started wondering, well, where is he getting these items from? Even though he was giving it to her, she was still questioning it, because something didn't feel right about it. And when she pushed back on her grandson, the grandson said, well, you've done such a great job of seeing about me, and I think I owe you that. When I see other people who have much more than we do, I take from them, and so that you can have. And that is a loose analogy for situational ethics, where sometimes human beings, they are able in their mind to accept, they do accept that what they're doing is traditionally, or structurally, it is not right. However, they are able to explain it away by bringing in some additional information that allows them to be a little more comfortable with it, maybe not so that it doesn't tickle their conscience. So breaking a traffic light, for example, sometimes in business courses, we ask persons, if you're stuck at a traffic light at midnight, and there are no other cars passing, will you break the light? And it's interesting, the rationales and the responses you get. So that's the best analogy I could give to the person in the maxi taxi. If your driver is speeding and breaking the speed limit, or breaking a red light, or driving in an irresponsible manner, do you say to yourself, well, I'll get to work or wherever I'm going earlier, and therefore I'm putting out of my mind that this is risking somebody else's life, even if it's my own? Uh, do you then speak up and say, driver, drive, listen, you need to drive better, because you have a people in your car, and you have to be careful? Or do you stay quiet and accept it? And that is situational ethics at its core.
And I think in our society we've become quiet, we've become voiceless. And when you talk about situational ethics, I recall as a child growing up in East Dry River, I went to Nelson Street Girls and I stole a pencil and took it home. And my mother said to me, "But this is not the pencil that I bought for you." So I said, "Well, I found it." She said, "Well, okay, let us go back and you are going to put it back exactly where you found it." And I cried and cried and cried, and she just waited. And we didn't do it that day. Because I was so upset because I didn't want to go back. She went to school with me the next morning and went to my teacher and said, she brought this pencil home and it's not one of ours, it's not hers. So I want her to bring it back. And that remained in my head, I think, to today, that, you have to rethink stealing something or breaking a rule and so on. And I don't, you talked about the grandmother and the child, and I'm now talking about my mother. And I
Yes.
wonder, how is it that has changed? Or does it still exist? What are your views on that?
Well, it's only this morning, unfortunately, the nation is discussing this tragedy of the young child who took his own life, ostensibly because of bullying. I mean, I am a victim of bullying myself, or a survivor. They say you're not supposed to use the word victim anymore, but uh, and made a contribution to a program earlier today about the topic, and I spoke about learned behavior. And bullying, stealing, uh, lying, and all of these things that people do, none of us are innocent. I myself have had as a child similar experiences to the one that you would have just shared. And if all of us are honest with ourselves, these things happen because you might observe someone else doing it, or you'd see it on television, or but the problem, the biggest problem, is when you see it in your parents, or when your parents encourage or enable or don't intervene the way our parents might have at an early stage to correct that type of mindset or behavioral pattern. And bullying is just like that. Parents teach their children, Denise, to be prejudiced, to look at someone else and think because they're a certain height, a certain width, a certain complexion, whatever the difference is, that for some reason that person is somehow less than you are. And and ethics, uh, again, stealing and physical violence are perhaps the worst examples of ethical breaches. But as you said, a simple thing as learning to answer a question truthfully, and ethics is defined as doing the right thing even when no one is watching. uh,
Yeah.
Being able to see a $100 bill on the ground and bringing it to someone's attention, rather than simply saying, well, finders keepers, losers weepers. So
Mm.
parents do have an amazing role to play in how children, because the science behind all of this, just again for the man in the maxi or the woman driving the maxi, the people's brains, all of our brains are formed over time based on what we do, how we action our day-to-day activities. So like brushing your teeth, some of us, you don't even remember doing it sometimes, because that becomes so ingrained in your brain because of how your brain works, that you don't really spend a lot of thought around it. And it's the same thing with ethics and what we're talking about. What you want to do is to train people from a young age where it becomes so normal and ingrained in them that you don't even have to stop and think about what you're doing. And many people, thankfully, Denise, I've seen, uh, actually know what it is and practice it. Again, the majority of our citizens are ethical people because they go to work every day, do what they're supposed to do. They don't take things, they don't break the traffic lights, they don't steal anything from their neighbors because it's hanging over the fence, like a nice shirt that you thought you could buy. People don't do these things. That's why only a small section of the society is actually involved in criminal behavior. But we have to be mindful and intentional.
Hmm. I wanted to challenge you on that because sometimes I feel as if I'm the only one who want to do things right. I'm the only one who not breaking the traffic light. I'm the only one who following the number of mileage in the on the highway or on the road and so on. Sometimes I really feel as if, oh my goodness, everybody around me is just breaking the rules.
Oh. No, I feel like that's I used to make this joke with a friend that instead of saying they live amongst us, it has become we live amongst them. But interestingly, if I could just use with the since we're on the traffic analogy, over the weekend, I believe there was a report that the police service, they executed a few traffic stops and searches and whatnot. And they reported, I want to say, about 60 violations. I am sure, Denise, that there were hundreds of cars that passed by the police. And if we do the data of it, the stats of it, it's maybe what, less than 10% actually were infringing the law. So I hear you. I know that what sometimes comes up to the surface, what is louder, it tends to be the negative. But and I know that we are examples, our friends, our co-workers, there's so many of us out there that just want to do the right thing, and we just have to encourage each other. Sometimes it's a simple thing as someone says to you, gosh, this thing is taking so long. Should I pay a bribe? And I mean, I've heard that in conversation, and thankfully, most people would say, hey, don't even go down that road. Don't think about that. We know it's difficult. How can we find another way to maybe in the interim solve this challenge? But don't go down that road, brother. Don't do that.
So,
So,
so
maxi
Rudy,
taxi drivers, don't break the traffic light.
you're saying that generally our society has people who are ethically sound and doing the right things. Do you think that's the same with our politicians?
Ah, now that is where now again, for people out there, always remember that there is apparently a new statistic out, right? That we have 1.5 million people in Trinidad and Tobago. There are 41 MPs. So 41 out of 1.5 million. I mean, I don't even have to do the math, right? So, just for context, they make up a small segment of the population. But to go back to what I was saying earlier, when you listen to some of their speeches, when you observe how they behave, and over the years, when you accept that there have been so many allegations across all acronyms, across all symbols, some of which have actually ended up in the DPP's office. You see, even in the police system, that officers themselves are being arrested, Denise, for breaches of severe crimes. There is some truth, that these people who have been given authority, have been given the responsibility to set the best example, they are practicing a variation in general of situational ethics. They are allowing themselves to breach the norms that we have set. They are allowing themselves to even get involved in illegal and nefarious activity in some cases. So, what starts happening is when you don't have an equal pushback, where you don't have a balancing symbol, or some other group in society that is in the same field to represent the fact that hey, it's not all of us, it's maybe just some of us. I mean, you take any profession, for example. There is some negative connotation against another profession that I've studied, law, for example. Many people will say, oh, get rid of all these lawyers, they facilitate a lot of bad things. But even in that profession, there are enough, let's say, use the word good, lawyers that balance it off. So people kind of accept that, well, it's not all of them at the end of the day. We're not seeing that, unfortunately, in the politics, Denise. We're not seeing enough of that pendulum, that balancing mechanism to reinforce the notion that, hold on, let's not generalize. The majority of our politicians are actually ethical and upstanding people. And when you listen to the debate, like what is happening right now with the national budget, you basically can pull from one side and the other, and there are enough comparables where neither side has ethical sway. Neither side has the moral suasion to call out the other side, because one will say you did X, and then on the next speaker gets up and says, oh, by the way, you did that as well. So I mean, that is the problem that we are facing. So other people have to take the decision to get involved in the politics and rebalance it.
So, do you think that political realities often just require compromise?
No. I'll tell you why I'm so categorical about that.
Absolutely categorical that there's no compromise.
Politics has to be implemented and managed according to at least the laws of the land. And interestingly, the highest law of the land, the Constitution, if people take the time to read parts of the Constitution in and of itself, Denise, does not outline every single law. What it does is it sets a very high ethical framework for the legal system and for how we want to structure our society. And the oath of office that every political appointee or elected official takes speaks to those highest ethical standards, whether you put your hand on a Quran, a Bhagavad Gita, or a Bible, or on your heart. That is what you're ascribing to, ethical principles. So if you are engaged in the business of the people, which is the true meaning of politics, then you have to be able to implement that type of business according to the oath of office that you've taken and the laws of the land. And when you compromise those values, when you, for example, let us say you have 10 social programs, uh, or social welfare uh, grants to award, and the only rationale that you are applying is whether these 10 people supported me, then you are directly breaching that oath where it says without fear or favor in the way that I dispense my elected duties. So no, we cannot compromise and again cop out by saying, well, I'm a politician, and politics has a morality of its own, um and the people will understand because all of them are the same way, and no. You speak to your followers and say, look, there are 6 criteria that I have to apply here. Are you someone who meets these 6 criteria? And if it so happens that you are part of the group that has supported me, then you've received a blessing. But you can't receive it just because you look like me, vote like me, speak like me, or etc. I say no, because where's the slippery slope end? Where does the slide end?
I think that where Trinidad is at the moment is that we're just continuing on that slippery slope of people are just doing what they can do for their friends and for their connections, and they're doing it at the greater risk of others, the greater negative response to others. So a lot of people who are experiencing a negative living approach, it's because some of the people who support some politicians are doing positively, so that there is an inequity in terms of the allocation of funding, in terms of the giving of grants and so on. But that's my opinion. It might be absolutely wrong. When we look at the political landscape, how do you think it shapes our perception of truth?
Wow, that is a simple, the words are simple, but that question is quite deep. it has skewed it, and I'm speaking generally again. All generalizations sacrifice some truth, but generally, unfortunately, it has skewed the way that we all look at truth. I mean, in the American experience, you have that famous saying, "alternative facts," and there are people who still believe that the Earth is flat. There's a Again, it goes back to how your brain works, and what you choose to feed yourself with, what information you choose to feed yourself with. And unfortunately, the loudest voices amongst us tend to be voices that are active in the political realm. So you would find that the same people I mentioned before, who are active members of political parties, those people have the characteristics, the qualities, the experience of also being public commentators. So some of them are not elected officials, but they've been involved in politics and advocacy work like you and I have been, etc. So they tend to be out there in the public. They write articles, they give interviews, you see them in protests, etc. And those loud voices start becoming accepted as the quote unquote God given truth, because it's just what you hear constantly. But the silent majority, now this is where we, and I'm going to say uh, we have some culpability to play in that skewing, that refashioning of lies being accepted as some version of the truth. There is no version of the truth except the truth. you know People say there's your side, my side, and then there is the truth, and that is true. So the truth is an absolute. It is not something that today it looks a certain way and tomorrow it changes. Again, another politician, I won't call their name, had made a statement to that effect, that things change day by day. So it is affecting when and it's like that Aesop's fable, the boy who called wolf. Even when some of the political leadership in the country actually state the truth, they they are surprised when people don't believe them. But people will distrust because for a number of other occasions, you have not been stating the truth. I'll just quickly add, though, I do think that the average citizen is quite capable, and yes, this might come as a revelation to politicians and other leaders. The average person is quite capable of seeing through. You talk about transparency; they can tell that it's Gobar from a mile away. And again, that is why they say, well, look, here's another one, just trying to pull wool over our eyes. And that's why over 350,000 voters, Denise, on average every year don't vote. At
Mhm.
least in part, I think.
Yeah, yeah. Tell me, what do you mean by gobar?
So that's a technical term for the excrement of the bovine species. I have to give you this joke. I really have to give you this joke. We were talking about parenting and teachers and schools and stuff. Mr. Claude Manet was one of my primary school teachers. And if you did something in class that was really in contravention of what you were taught, he would tell you in front of the entire class, what you just did is stinking to the high heavens, like unadulterated. And he would use the non politically correct word for cow manure. So that is that has also stayed with me as a child, from as early as a child, that people know what BS is from a mile away, and they might just say it, sort of ignore it and scoff it off, but maybe less of us, not maybe less of us, need to stop scoffing it off and calling it out for what it is.
And why do you think that so many people seem to, I have been describing it as we have lost our voices? Why do you think we've lost our voices?
It's fair.
You mean
It's
fear, Fear?
correct. Fear. F- Fear is an insidious disciple of lies and unethical behavior. I'll tell you what I mean by that. Again, for anyone listening out there, we all live with fear. We put it out of our minds. We are trained, we sort of, our brains develop a survival mechanism where we are able to ignore it. A simple fear is that of death. We all know it's going to be a morbid bit of the conversation, but we all know from the time we are born that there will come a point in this life when we will die. And that's why I mentioned the loss of my father at 14, because it did leave a very specific view on life with me. the that fear, people, you see it every day, people put it out of their minds again by acting irresponsibly, speeding, drinking too much alcohol, taking risks with their lives. But there are other fears, Denise. You are a mother. When you are a parent, I see it in my mother. She is afraid that something may happen to her child, or that she will not be able to provide for her child. You have a fear of losing your job, a fear of not fulfilling the dreams that you may have promised to your children or your wife or your husband. What is happening is that those fears are being compounded in the society by a belief that if we only dare to stand out of the line, or to raise our heads up, or to use our voice to speak out, or to take action against what we are seeing, as I said earlier, we're seeing clearly what should not be, that not only will some of those fears come to pass, but they will be done deliberately to us. We may lose our lives, we may lose our profession, we may lose what is important to us. We will not be able to survive because somebody will deliberately take action against us. And when that type of fear is just sitting inside of us, it it forces many of us to engage in situational ethics. And that's why, they talk, you are a trained counselor now, and you would have dealt with the concept of depression. And
Mhm.
I'm sure a lot of people out there know that word. And it's a very serious clinical diagnosis. But interestingly, the same way that an individual can be diagnosed with depression, so can a nation.
Mm.
And when you look at some of our behavioral patterns, again, I'm speaking generally, as a country, psychologists and psychiatrists will tell you that those behavioral patterns seem to suggest that as a nation, we are depressed. We are suffering from some form of post traumatic stress syndrome, disorder, sorry,
Disorder.
PTSD.
Mhm,
So
mhm,
that's what I'm talking about. I think that that is what has caused our voices to be kept maintained at a muted levels. Now, the voice is there when you're in small gatherings, or sometimes people use Facebook to really unpack and unleash what is pent up inside. Uh, and again, people may find what I'm about to say very controversial, but a lot of the criminal activity, domestic violence, and other, you know other actions that that normally would not be at the level that they are at, these are also symptoms of people trying to find ways to overcome that fear. And I have been in spaces and places, I'm sure you have as well, where you meet people like residents of YTC, for example, and when you speak to them, they're teenagers, and you really unpack why did you do some of the things that you did. All they were trying to do was to overcome their own internal fears. and they acted out against it. Now, does it make it right? No, I'm not going to practice situational ethics here and say, oh, well, give them a pass. But how do we rehabilitate? How do we proactively free people of some of these fears so that they don't have to make that choice?
I have a very simple response to that, and that is that leadership is really the way to transform the nation. Our leaders must perform in a way that we all feel as if they are being absolutely honest, they're being fair, they're being empathetic, they're showing their love. And unless we get that, I don't think our society will change. There are people who challenge me on that, but I really leave it with leadership. There's also a role for the followers, but the leadership is really where I think it begins. How do you
Yes,
feel about that
yes.
statement?
No, I have to agree with you. Leaders at all levels, religious leaders, business leaders, community, and I mean real community leaders, not again, not what the word has been co-opted to mean, parents, teachers. The, because you see, leaders, Denise, leaders by their very nature, uh, they have that capacity to encourage, to influence. Leaders require different types of skills. They are supposed to be able to communicate well. They're supposed to inspire people, etc. Uh, they Apart from that, they also have a lot of privilege, and I spoke about that earlier in my introduction. Those of us that have been given, because you are given leadership, it's not something you can really take. I mean, people try to take it, but if nobody's following you, you're no leader, right? People choose who their leaders are for different reasons, and with that comes certain authority, resources, networks, etc. So Plato spoke about the fact that the elites of society are really the ones that are supposed to manage the society. Now, in today's world, that word elite has also become a bad word. What he was really referring to were not necessarily the oligarchs or the richest, the 1%, as we like to say, or the business class. He was talking about even the best farmers of the land, the persons who understood how to in what we now call engineering. There were people who just knew how to do these things, as well as people who would have gone to formal schools and had certain business acumen, etc. His idea was that the leaders in all spheres of society were the ones that were supposed to maintain the highest standards and to coalesce around these common values, this common vision for the country, which, by the way, is another project that our part is involved in, sort of crafting what TT 100 would look like when we celebrate 100 years. What is that common vision that we have for ourselves, where we want to be, how do we get there? And the leaders are the ones that are supposed to use the privilege and the authority and the resources that they have been blessed with to effect that. But again, many of them unfortunately have become greedy or self-serving, and they use it for only a certain vested interest. But we can take the leadership back. That is the power that I want to leave people with, if anything at all, coming out of this conversation, is that if politicians have a morality of their own, then the people, the citizens, the other P, must have the true morality and the true ethics, and we must demand that that is what we want from our leaders.
Okay, Rudy, as we wrap this 1 hour discussion up, if a miracle happened and you could change reality, what would be your most important action to transform the reality in Trinidad and Tobago?
You've heard me mention in this conversation a number of times my teachers. Denise, I would snap my fingers and create equity in education through providing equal access for all children, not just in formal training, but vocational studies. We need to uplift the intellect, the critical thinking, the opportunities for children to develop careers and opportunities for themselves in what they're passionate about and what they naturally have tendencies to be good at. And I think if we did that, if we had, and again, my blue blood brothers are going to send me messages about this, we need every school to be a prestige school from primary, secondary to tertiary level, so that children, no matter where they are from, they can have that equality of opportunity. And in that way, we will end poverty. We will end this same ignorance or this same inability for people to be empowered and to understand what is being, thrown at them as Morby, but being called champagne, etc. So that would be my wish: equity in education, genuinely and intentionally achieve that.
But the current government will say to you, but they're doing that already. We're in the process of ensuring that all our schools become prestige schools. We're in the process of ensuring that all our children have education, they have access to education. So what are you talking about?
82% of our expenditures on recurrent needs in the education budget. That leaves us a pittance for development work. And actually, if you visit our PARTT YouTube channel, we have an unboxing podcast that deals specifically with education. And Dennise, having a building in of itself might allow you to check on a criteria sheet that we have the space for the child to sit in. But I go back to that issue about bullying. When I was at Queen's Royal College, Angela Eiffel was the guidance counselor, and that woman saved many lives, mine included. And today, in the school system, we do not have enough social workers, psychologists, and guidance counselors. So, yes, the child is sitting in the school, but do we have all of the amenities that we require to ensure that that child does not end up like that young boy who took his life recently? So it's another argument for another day, but I will leave you with that it's a complex matter, and money is one part of the issue. But how do we manage those resources? How do we ensure that all the layers are there to facilitate the outcome that we want, which is really equality of opportunity, not necessarily outcome, but just the right opportunity to get where you want to go.
Thank you very much, Rudy, for spending an hour with us, having a wonderful conversation. And if there are some things you want people to keep in their head based on our discussion, what would those things be?
That we must do, as this is going to sound very self-serving at this point, but we must all do our part in our own way. Find out how you can make a positive difference. Do not give in to the negativity. Look around you. As Dennise said, our country is beautiful. There are so many opportunities and resources. And let us support each other, Dennise, in fighting for what is right. Not just talking about it or praying about it, but getting involved and actioning things that will make a difference in your own way. Whatever small part that is, play it. That's what I would like to leave our viewers with.
So, whatever part you wish to play, play it,
Play it.
because it is, if we are to be successful, we all have to play our part. And
Yes.
one of the things that I am certainly taking away from this is that it's not politics has a morality of its own, but it's really politicians have a morality of its own. So thank you very much.
My
And
pleasure.
thank
Thank
you
you.
to our viewers and listeners. Check in again on Wednesday at 8 a.m. for Power Conversation hosted by Dennise Demming. Thank you and goodbye.